And welcome to The Bright Side. I am Pharmacist Ben, and thanks for joining us. 844-236-6010 is our number. If you have questions, comments, success stories, if you want to wean yourself off your meds and get on a good nutritional supplement program, we're here for you, 844-236-6010. We love hearing from you, and if you have a success story, you just want to contribute to the conversation, 844-236-6010 is our number. We'll get to your calls in our next segment. We'll be speaking to Michael Betris at the bottom of the hour. Michael's the author of a book called COVID-19 Lockdowns on Trial, and he's got some really interesting things to say about lockdowns and testing and some of the ominous signs. I don't know if you guys heard just about an hour ago in London, Boris Johnson announced a 3-tier lockdown system, really intense lockdown system. There's all kinds of craziness going on. We're going to talk to Michael Betris at the bottom of the hour. He spent hundreds of hours analyzing medical and social data and crunching numbers, and he is going to talk to us about lockdowns. Lockdowns on Trial is the title of his book, COVID-19 Lockdowns on Trial. Bottom of the hour, we'll get your calls. Next segment, 844-236-6010. If you want to purchase your longevity products, go to brightsideben.com, pharmacistben.com, or criticalhealthnews.com. Check out our news stories and blog posts and videos on all our websites. And, of course, you can click on the Join the Team link if you want to sign up to join the Brightside Ben team and start yourself a home-based business. That's brightsideben.com, pharmacistben.com, or criticalhealthnews.com, or you can call 866-735-2470, 866-735-2470. All right, so we've been talking about the nature of fats as opposed to water-soluble nutrients or substances, molecules that dissolve in water versus molecules that dissolve in fat or oil-soluble versus water-soluble, hydrophilic, as they say, versus lipophilic. This distinction is really, really important, but we don't talk about it very often. We talk about it on this program, but as a culture, we don't really distinguish fats from water as much as we should, or as much as we need to really benefit from both of them. That's why I've been hitting this stuff hard. The idea, this distinction between water solubility and fat solubility is based in the atomic and the molecular nature of chemistry. And we hardly ever discuss this. We don't think about the molecular nature, the atomic nature of things. We think in the macro level, at the macro level. When we think macroscopically, we lose our power because our power occurs at the fundamental levels, which are atomic and molecular. There's a school of study or a academic study called submolecular biology. Submolecular. That means underneath the molecule. So just to keep this all in perspective, you've got organs, which are made up of tissues, which are made up of cells. Most people, when they're talking about health, are talking at the organ or tissue level. Doctors, in particular, talk about the organ level. That's why they feel very comfortable just taking organs out. You've got a problem, it's an organ problem, we'll just take the organ out. That's why the medical model feels very comfortable electrocuting organs, ablating them, as they say. Because the medical model, again, we're not ripping on doctors individually, we're ripping on the paradigm, the model. The model focuses on symptoms which show up at the organ level. We see them at the organ level. If you want to go a little deeper, you can go into the tissues, and sometimes the medical model will address the tissues. However, tissues are made up of cells. And it is the cell that is the nexus of disease. But inside the cell is where the problem arises, and that's at the molecular level. However, the molecular level is made up of the submolecular level, and that's where our true power resides. Submolecularly, i.e. at the level of the electrons and the protons, that's where the quantum biology kicks in. There's a guy named Emmanuel Ravici. We talked about him a couple days ago. Dr. Emmanuel Ravici, he was a Romanian physician and biochemist. And he talked about the quantum definitions, the quantum basis to disease, specifically the quantum basis of cancer. Cancer is a quantum phenomenon. Like all disease is a quantum phenomenon, or all health is a quantum phenomenon. When I say quantum, I don't want anybody freaking out, because quantum just means submolecular. Probably the most important and the most brilliant biochemist of all time was a guy named Albert St. Georgi. He's credited with discovering the vitamin C molecule, elucidating the vitamin C molecule. We'd known about something in citrus for centuries that cured scurvy. Ascorbic acid means without scurvy, and Dr. James Lind back in the 1700s was the guy who discovered that there was something in citrus fruits that could cure scurvy. Well, that something, we didn't know what that something was until maybe about 1920 or so when Albert Szent-Györgyi isolated ascorbic acid. He discovered the ascorbic acid molecule, and that's his claim to fame. But he really was, his real major emphasis was on submolecular biology. He wrote a book called The Living State, where he talked about life itself as being a submolecular phenomenon. Submolecular means quantum. Submolecular means within the molecule. By the way, to keep this all in, just give you a visual sense of what we're talking about, a molecule is so small that you could fit septillions of them. That means if a billion is 2 and a trillion is 3 and a quadrillion is 4, septillion is 7. You can't even comprehend what that means. So you could fit a septillion water molecules, H2O molecules, in a glass of water. That's how small a molecule is. Yet there is a submolecular world that's smaller still. And that's where power resides, at that submolecular state. When submolecular chemistry is working correctly, everything is flowing correctly, electricity is moving through the body. Health means whole. When the body is whole, electricity can move through the body. Dis-ease, when we're out of ease, when we're not healthy, we're fragmented, we're not whole, we're in pieces. And the electricity can't flow. It hits spaces where where the bridge is missing. Just think of just going hiking in the mountains, and you come across a place where there's a little patch of water, and there used to be a bridge, and there's no more bridge. You can't get across. You can't get from point A to point B. In the body, when the bridges are missing, electricity can't go from point A to point B, and that's what disease is. Essential nutrients are bridges. Essential nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, the phytonutrients, which I'm going to talk about here in a sec, the essential fatty acids, the essential amino acids, they're bridges that allow electricity to flow, and they restore a fragmented body back to health. That's why essential nutrients are so important. They facilitate the movement of electrical energy at the submolecular level, at the quantum level. What's really cool to me about this, the submolecular basis of health or disease, is the fact that at the submolecular level, consciousness has major control. This is one of the lessons of quantum physics, is that consciousness controls things at the submolecular level. It's where mind over matter comes in. This is where the airy-fairy meets the scientific world. Airy-fairy and abstractions and woo-woo, as we'll say. You guys know what I'm talking about when I say woo-woo meets science at the level of quanta, at the level of the electron, because at the level of the electron, how we think changes things. Thus, the power and the major importance of the mental and emotional and even spiritual levels of health and wellness. That's why we talk about it so much on this program, and that's why if you're trying to take care of yourself just with nutrition, if you're trying to take care of yourself just with vitamins and minerals and essential nutrients, you may get better, but you're not going to be 100% healed if you don't address the spiritual, mental, and emotional levels because of this submolecular connection to health. All right, we're back on the bright side. I'm pharmacist Ben. We'll be talking to Michael Betrus in our next segment. Michael is the author of a book about lockdowns, COVID-19 lockdowns on trial. You guys may have heard just before we went on the air about maybe half an hour ago, 45 minutes ago, Boris Johnson in the UK announced strict lockdown measures. Why are we buying into this stuff, people? Now, present company excluded, of course. I'm sure most of you do not buy into this nonsense. But why as a culture are we buying into this idea that we have to hide from a virus, that we have to run in the house, that we have to lock ourselves down? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me that we have to lock ourselves down? The restaurants and hotels and service industries are going to go out of business. People's jobs and places of employment and businesses that they've been building for decades are now going to go under because of this? How is this okay in any way? Michael Betrus has done lots of study on this. He's analyzed hundreds of hours of social data, crunched the numbers, and we'll talk to Michael Betrus about COVID-19, about his book, COVID-19 Lockdowns on Trial. And in our next segment, we'll get your calls, if we have any, right now, in this segment, 844-236-6010. So just to give you an idea of the scale of what we're talking about here, when we talk about submolecular biology, which is really where our power resides, we're talking about atoms. An atom, if an atom were the size of a marble, a molecule would be the size of your fist. Atoms are about 1/10,000th the size of a bacteria. Bacteria is about 1/10,000th the size of a mosquito. So an atom is about 100,000 times smaller than a mosquito. Picture a mosquito in your head. 100,000 times smaller than that is an atom. Within the atom, the center of the atom is, i.e., the so-called nucleus, which is where a lot of the energy resides, we'll say. It's 100,000 times smaller than that. So you're talking about 1,000,000 times smaller than a mosquito. And then if you're talking about the size of an electron or proton, you're talking about another 100,000 times smaller than that. So you're talking about hundreds of thousands, millions of times, 100,000 million times smaller than a mosquito. That's the kind of level we're talking about. Yeah, how does anything even exist at that level? Yet it does. And even at that level, there's complexity in organization. There's things inside electrons called quarks. And I don't want to get into too much of this, but just get a sense of how tiny we're talking about. And while you can't manipulate that stuff directly, obviously, it's so small, you can do it indirectly. And that's what everything we talk about in the world of health is about. Essential fatty acids contain dense energy in certain areas. Just real quick review of fatty acids here. You have different types of fatty acids, and these are all referred to as, or distinguished by their level of what's called saturation. When something is saturated, the energy flows really smoothly. It's very stable. Saturated fats are very stable. They don't move because everything's kind of locked in place. When something's unsaturated, there's clumps. Unsaturated means clumps. Instead of the energy flowing smoothly across the molecule, a saturated fat is like a long chain of electrical energy. Think of a wire. An unsaturated fat has clumps of energy. And those clumps turn that molecule into something that's from something that's stable and solid into something that's flexible and fluid. Unsaturated fats are fluid. Saturated fats are hard. Lard is your classic example of a saturated fat. It's solid. It's stable. Coconut oil has a lot of saturated fats in it. It's not all saturated fats, so it's not totally solid and stable, but it has a solidity to it. Now, unsaturated fats, when something's unsaturated, there's little clumps, and that makes it liquidy, and there's different kinds of unsaturated fats. There's fats that have only one clump. Those are called monounsaturated fats, mono meaning one. But olive oil is a classic example of a one clump type of an oil that contains one clump fats, monounsaturated fats. And there's the ones that have lots of clumps, or a few clumps anyway, not lots, but a few clumps. Those are called polyunsaturated. Unsaturated, just in your head, think clump. Clumps of energy. Polyunsaturated fats have clumps of energy. These are really liquidy. But because they have these clumps of energy, they're very unstable. Stability comes from having no clumps. Clumps don't want things. Energy doesn't want to be clumped up, so it readily declumps. Heat declumps saturated clumps, polyunsaturated fats, and when the heat hits it, it becomes unstable. This is that's why you never want to heat your vegetable oils. Oxygen, same way. Oxygen will declump these oils or declump these little pieces of energy. So polyunsaturated fats with lots of clumps or several clumps are very unstable. This is why you'll hear nutritionists, Dr. Wallach sometimes, and other nutritionists will say, don't eat vegetable oils. Why? Because the vegetable oils contain lots of these clumpy fatty acids, and they're very unstable. Nonetheless, there are two polyunsaturated fats with clumps that are extremely important. Obviously, you know those are the essential fatty acids. They call them omega-6 because the clumps are in the 6th position. I'm not going to get into too much structural chemistry, but omega-6 refers to the structure and where the clump is. Omega-3s have the clump in a different place. You have in the 3 position, omega-3. Chemistry is very logical, by the way. And if you're a chemist, you can hear the name of a chemical structure, and you can kind of get a sense of what it looks like, and you can see a chemical structure, and you can kind of get a sense of what it does. And by the way, those little lines that are connecting atoms that if you recall your high school biology or high school chemistry, where you had those shaped things with a C and an H and an O and an N and little lines connecting them all. Hopefully you guys remember that. It wasn't too long ago. Well, guess what? Those little lines are not really lines in real life. They're electrical energy. They're magnetism. The lines represent electromagnetic energy. The whole thing is put together with magnetism. That's pretty amazing right there, folks. This is what it means that we are electromagnetic beings. And our cells are electromagnetic. And all the stuff that we're talking about with clumps and with stability and with instability and with heat and with nutrition and the flow of energy, all of this is because we're electromagnetic beings. Our cells are electromagnetic beings, or entities or beings. A cell has voltage, has a negative charge inside and a positive charge outside, and that's a battery. And in between it has a membrane made up of fatty acids. And that membrane conducts energy sometimes and doesn't conduct energy other times. It's a semiconductor. Sometimes it conducts, sometimes it doesn't conduct, and that allows it to be an information processor. So not only is a cell an electrical entity in a battery, it's an information processor. How cool is that? And this electromagnetism, this voltage, I should say, inside a cell is to the tune of maybe 1.4 volts or so. 1.4 volts times 100 trillion, that's a lot of electrical energy. That's a lot of electricity that runs our bodies. And anything we could do to facilitate that electrical energy is going to make us healthier. Essential fatty acids are powerful electromagnetic transducers, carriers, if you will. Fatty acids, by the way, hold on to electrical energy. Watery nutrients, fats, I should say, hold on to electrical energy. Water conducts it. Water transports it, moves it. They both work together. It's the fats that hold on to it, and they hold on to it not consistently. They semi-hold on to it. They semi-conduct. And it's the semi-nature that counts for the intelligence of a cell. It sometimes does and sometimes doesn't. That's where 0-1 comes in. That's where on-off comes in. All of this is to say, make sure you're supplementing with your Ultimate EFAs and Ultimate EFA Plus, especially if you have skin problems, but also brain problems and also heart problems, and also liver problems. And unfortunately, essential fatty acids are the kind of supplements, or the class of supplements, that we tend to ignore because it's hard to find them in a lot of over-the-counter products. All right, Michael Betris coming up in our next segment. We'll be back on the bright side right after this. On the bright side, I am Pharmacist Ben, and thanks for joining us. We're on the air Monday through Friday, 8 to 9 Pacific and 10 to 11 Central, 24/7 on the archive page at benfuchsarchives.com. Thank you to Peter in the UK for setting that up. We also have archives at brightsideben.com, and longevity products can be purchased at brightsideben.com, as well as pharmacistben.com and criticalhealthnews.com. We've got videos, news stories, blog posts, lots of good health information on our websites. You can also call 866-735-2470 for more information. And don't forget to take a look at our True Skin Health products, all formulated in my compounding pharmacy for wound healing. Wound healing equals beauty. When you heal a wound, you heal the skin. And when you heal the skin, you beautify the skin. Healing equals beauty, and you'll never find preservatives, fragrances, fillers, waxes, emulsifiers, water, silicone, vegetable oil, nothing your skin doesn't need or doesn't want in any of our Truth Skin Health products. And take a look at our over 1,000 4- and 5-star reviews at truthreviewed.com, truthreviewed.com. All right, we are going to talk some lockdown and COVID-19. You know, I talk about it a little bit on this program. I don't want to get too much into the weeds with COVID-19, except to say I've smelt a scam from day one. This stuff doesn't meet the science. And there's so much craziness associated with the measures that we're taking to defeat this tiny little virus. We're talking about small. Viruses are 1,000 times smaller than a bacteria, which itself is 100,000 times smaller than a mosquito. So we're talking about the very, very tiniest levels. People still don't know what a virus is, believe it or not, exactly what it is. And virus infections are still in the realm of the hypothetical and theoretical, believe it or not, even though we hear all this stuff in the news and in politics and about viruses and viral infections. Michael Betris is our guest, and his book is COVID-19 Lockdowns on Trial. Please welcome to the bright side, Michael Betris. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Ben.
How you doing today?
Very well. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Listen, I've smelt a rat in this thing from day one. There's no virus that's been seen, no Koch's postulates, no proof of contagion, no proof of causation, no proof of masking, that masking works, that lockdowns work. So the question I have for you, Michael, right off the bat here, why as a culture do we believe all of this, and why is all the messaging in such lockstep?
Well, I think the answer to the first one is really the media coverage. So, and I identified this early really back in April, and really even before that. So the reason I wrote the book in the first place was recreationally, as just an American, I was studying the 2 cruise ships that were quarantined in February and March.
Yeah.
And when the second one ported in, really nothing happened, and it was surprising considering the incredible coverage that it had. And
can you tell the story? Can you tell the story of the cruise ships real quick?
Sure. The first cruise ship, they were both Princess Cruises. One was in the Far East, and it was quarantined in Japan after somebody had been identified with SARS-CoV-2. Again, this was very early on. This was in February. And 7 people ended up dying out of 3,700 total people, crew and passengers that were on that ship. Remember, the cruise ships have a predominantly elderly population. The second cruise ship was the Grand Princess. I paid attention to that because I'd actually been on that ship, its second journey back in '97. And when that was ported in, it was really covered like the Bronco chase, like, what was going to happen? It was out at sea for 4 days.
Yep.
And when it came in, really nothing happened. And so we ended up with, out of those 2 cruise ships, we had 7,400 crew and passengers and 10 fatalities, all elderly, all with comorbidities.
Well, hang on, though. You're saying on a cruise ship of 7,400 elderly people with COVID and comorbid people who were over the age of 74, average age of 74, only 10 people died?
Yeah. Now, don't forget there would be younger people on the cruise too, as well as the crew itself would have been, predominantly younger and not at risk. But it's still a good sampling, right? It's a perfect scientific experiment because the Imperial College model that followed it about 10 days later predicted in a do-nothing scenario 2.2 million deaths and a 10-fold shortfall on the peak day of hospitalizations or hospital beds. And so I plugged the numbers from the Imperial College, again, before I wrote the book, into the cruise ship data. The cruise ship should have had 155 fatalities based on all the population segments, and we had 10, and I thought, this doesn't add up. Then we locked down, California first, Illinois, New York, and it was very clear by the first week of April, and no diminishing that COVID-19 is real. It is very real if you're in an at-risk category. It is more dangerous than the flu if you're at risk. If you're younger, it's actually less dangerous. So it's, I guess in one way, we're lucky to be able to identify that. But in plugging in those numbers and looking at all the lockdowns, it just wasn't what I'd call a proportionate response, and so that's what prompted me to write this book.
Well, the question I have for you here is, why is everything so in lockstep? Is something being done nefariously here, in your opinion? Everything seems to be in lockstep. Nobody's talking about the Princess Cruise, for example. They're all talking about the Imperial College model. You didn't hear about the Princess Cruise after that, but you heard all about the Imperial College model. And that's an example of this lockstep. What's going on here?
So it's a great comment because I've done almost 100 of these interviews since the book came out, and every time I tell that story, the interviewer and all these guys, everybody's pretty dialed into your perspective, and yet everybody's like, oh my gosh, no one ever talks about going back to the cruise ship data. Mm-hmm. Well, they do go back to it in places like the Lancet and medical journals where they actually do some analysis. They do reflect back on how it plays out relative to that. But I think the media coverage has overwhelmed this. For example, I live in a conservative state. I live in Dallas, and even if you look at some, it's not just Republicans and Democrats, because there's Republican states, Ohio and Texas, where they're still kind of locking down. You've got less than 50% of the kids in school face to face today, and the media coverage has stoked some genuine fear. So there's not really contextualizing what the data is. So an example of that is like Wisconsin's freaking out right now, right? They're putting together provisional 10-cent things for hospitalizations. Wisconsin right now is at 6.6% of their hospital beds occupied by COVID-19 patients, and that's with COVID or with SARS-CoV-2.
Well, wait, 94% empty?
Well, no, 94% without COVID. So,
I see.
Hospitals are supposed to run like a hotel. They're supposed to be at over a 90% occupancy, or they won't make it. So, but a 6.6 contribution percent to a hospital's occupancy is not, to me, it's again disproportionate to be locking down schools and people's jobs, and the face mask thing is a whole other story. But again, it's this proportionate response.
Michael, on every level, this stinks. Every single level, it smells. What is going on? How have people been so hypnotized, and why? What's with the lockstep? I've been in the media now for 30 years, Michael. I've never seen everybody in agreement like this. Have you?
Right. So it is crazy. And so you always hear about media bias, and this is probably the best example because you've got this hard start, in March, and it's not like you could talk about, maybe predispositions toward political affiliations or something. You've got this hard start on a blank slate, and you've got this media coverage. And I'll tell you, Ben, it's not just liberals or Democrats. There's a lot of people that are genuinely afraid of this thing.
Yes,
and
my mother.
And they won't.
People don't leave the house. We got to take a break, Michael, but we'll continue when we come back. I want to talk about lockdowns. I want to talk about the book about lockdowns, and I also want to touch on masking a little bit, too. Thanks for joining us, Michael. Michael Beatrice, his book, COVID-19 Lockdowns on Trial. We'll be back with more of Michael and COVID-19 Lockdowns on Trial right after this. Don't go away. Back on the bright side, we're talking to Michael Beatrice. His book is COVID-19 Lockdowns on Trial. LinkedIn site is Michael-Beatrice, and that's BETRUS-109775A. And you can get his book on Amazon as well. And also, he's got a Twitter account, @Beatrice_Michael. Sorry about that, Michael. So, lockdowns on trial. You put lockdowns on trial. What'd you find out?
Well, again, it's that proportionate response that I was talking about. So it's not that the issue to me isn't that COVID-19 isn't real. It's that take the real data, and is it a proportionate response to prompt 40 million people unemployed and put over half our kids out of school and all the other deaths of despair and collateral consequences? And so when you're talking about something that is, that the WHO has even come out and said lockdowns aren't appropriate, and you've got the Barrington Declaration by some top epidemiologists from Oxford and Stanford that have said lockdowns don't work. Again, it's really this proportionate response, and so we've just gone overboard because we locked down on the guise of overflowing hospitals. That isn't happening. We're not even close. Like New York is locked down, and they're at statistically, 1.3%. I did the math this morning of hospital capacity. How do you justify this at this point?
This is crazy, Michael. This is so crazy. It's like I feel like I'm in an alternative reality of some kind. But I keep getting back to my question. It seems like there's intent here. Do you know what I'm saying? It seems like there's something's happening with actual reasoning. It can't be just people just are not seeing this data. Everything you're talking about, it's obvious.
I tell you. So if you really think about all the predominance of social media feeds and what's happening in all the networks, the three major networks, cable news, including even Fox News during the day, there's a large hype around what's happening with cases and the fear of opening schools.
Yeah,
and cases is the wrong term because cases. So like one great little sort of subset of this whole thing is we've now got close to 100,000 kids at colleges that have been tested positive. I think we've had 2 hospitalizations and 0 fatalities, and we've
out of 100,000. Out of 100,000, 2.
You're in Colorado, right?
Yeah.
Where are you in Colorado?
Colorado, Denver, Boulder.
You're in Denver. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So, I wrote an article in the Washington Times 2 weeks ago about what the Boulder order, right? So Boulder has a spike. Colorado's had like 5 COVID-19 fatalities a day for months. And we know statistically about half the COVID-19 deaths are more somebody with it, not from it. And so you've got this, a fairly low number of fatalities. I'm not minimizing that. It's, again, the balance.
Understood.
And so Boulder, with a spike from CU going back to school in positive tests, which are probably only 50% accurate, they locked down 18 to 22-year-olds only. It's the wrong approach. So what they should have done is tell everybody in the community, hey, we're kind of getting a spike here. If you're in an at-risk category, you need to keep a low profile for probably 4 to 6 weeks. Let everybody else do their thing. Then what happens is the virus sort of runs its course. People get it, they get through it, they get immunity, and then it can't transmit. What we're doing is we're prolonging this thing,
of course,
by not letting the majority of Americans sort of pass it through, and then they can't transmit in the future.
They even admit it. They say it's spreading the curve. They said they don't want it to spike. They want to spread the spike. That's the whole premise of it. But what you just said is very politically incorrect. You're talking about herd immunity, basically. So, which, from a biological standpoint, that's what happens. But when you say that, or the media hears that, it gets portrayed as you want a bunch of people to die.
Right, but when you look at history, and I don't even have a medical background. My background is writing business books, and the unemployment is what triggered me to write this thing in terms of the balance here. But all the pandemics that I studied and wrote about in my book they've all fizzled out because eventually they reached an immunity status, a community immunity phase within the population, and then it just fizzled out. That's how these things end. I don't know why. Scott Atlas, Dr. Scott Atlas from Stanford, he's on President Trump's team now, and he's leading that charge, and he's clearly in conflict with CDC Director Redfield and Dr. Fauci, but he's the only voice of reason there.
So do you think Dr. Fauci and Redfield and these people who are talking about masking and are talking about lockdowns, they really believe all that stuff, or is there something else happening?
I do think they believe it, but I think that there's so much buckling, even in conservative states, to the media pressure. The media pressure is incredible, and it's almost like the cancel culture, right? Where you can, if you can sort of sustain the swarm coming at you for a few days, it'll move on to a softer target. But that pressure is immense, and it just seems like everybody's buckling to media pressure.
What's your take on, everybody talks about the mask and they talk about lockdowns a little bit less like that, but they talk about the mask and they talk about vaccines as if they're magical force fields that will somehow make you invulnerable to viral infections. What's your take on this whole idea of vaccinations as well as masking?
Right. So there are two questions there. I'll talk about the vaccinations first. So listen, if we end up getting that, great. What you find is that almost all the flu viruses that we get, they are coronaviruses. They're not SARS-CoV-2, but and so it's predicted that we might only need maybe 20% or so herd immunity of SARS-CoV-2 because there's a lot of built-in T-cell immunity based on other coronaviruses. And that's one reason that you see big spikes in like South Korea and Japan, but they've had like no fatalities. The only real explanation is because they're in the Far East. Maybe they've got some kind of generational immunity. On the mask issue, I tweet this out every now and then, but all the science and like all the medical journals prior to COVID, they all basically said wearing masks for viral infections is worthless.
Right.
And so and then even our Surgeon General, Redfield, and Fauci all denounced it even in February and early March.
In the New England Journal of Medicine, they called it symbolic. Did you read that article? He calls it symbolic and a talisman.
So, and I think it is, and I do think it kind of makes people feel good like they're doing their part. But what you'll see, if you go to a website called Rational Ground, they've got a mask chart. So I won't hand this up, but it's awesome. And so what they do is they show in all different states and countries when the mask mandates went into effect. And then you'll see weeks later this huge spike in cases based on, testing. And so the reason is exactly what you said when you teed me up, or interview up, is that the pores in a non-N95 mask are 1,000 times larger than a viral particle. That's why face masks do nothing. They and I'm not being a denier on this. I have to wear one in Texas, right? I'm just saying you can't find a trend anywhere in the world where they had low cases, they had a mask mandate, and they kept low cases. It just doesn't exist.
Well, you walk into a restaurant and you wear a mask to go to your table, but then you take the mask off. I mean, it's clearly not there for a reason. It's clearly symbolic. I mean, you don't have to be a deep thinker to see that it's symbolism that they're trying to get, and there's an element of compliance. And I'll tell you what, Michael, you're being very gentle here, but I see nefarious intentions. I don't know how you can avoid that conclusion.
I think that there's. I think there is nefarious conclusions to be drawn on the media, but I think that the politicians, the way that the polls are right now and sort of the tone in America, you will be forgiven for doing these lockdowns, even in a place like New York where there's no activity. But if you happen to have a slip up, or you happen to do what Ron DeSantis did or what Kristi Noem's done, you got to have a lot of internal strength and probably not be up for re-election anytime soon, because because sustaining that pressure is very difficult. It's very easy to just yield with the flow because the American people are supporting this. They just don't really know the data.
Yeah. They don't know the data, and they don't know data in general. The masses typically don't know data. So where do we end up? Where does this end? What's the future?
So there was a great comment that was made by the public health director of Los Angeles about 4 weeks ago, and she was caught on a mic and said, in a closed-door meeting, and somebody said, when are schools going to reopen? And she said, they'll probably reopen after the election. And I thought to myself, when that came out later that day, did you know that the virus is going to go away after it votes? Did you know that, Ben? So I didn't know that. But it does show you that there's some politicizing of this, and that, the people that are getting screwed are, where COVID-19 preys on the physically frail, these lockdowns are really
economically,
socially, and economically frail. And it's, you've got low-income people that are paying for it, and you've got disadvantaged kids that are getting completely screwed from lack of school right now.
That's exactly right. People who can afford to ride this out financially and economically, or they have, parents at home kind of thing, they're not gonna suffer as much. Michael, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Will you stay on the line? I want to chat with you real quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, Michael Beatrice, his book is COVID-19 Lockdowns on Trial. You can get it off Amazon. He also has a Twitter feed at Beatrice, and that's BETRUS_Michael. You can also check him out on his LinkedIn page, Michael Beatrice. Thank you so much for being on The Bright Side, and that's all the time we have for now. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Pharmacist Ben. Have yourselves a wonderful, awesome, beautiful, spectacular day. We'll talk to y'all later, folks. Bye for now.